Okay, I think we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining today's session. Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar, everybody. My name is Sriram. I drive the networking portfolio of VMware within Redington. So today we will be looking at Sd-Wan as a technology and how VMware Sd-Wan has shaped, the modern digital enterprise, as it is. And we're going to look at, the drivers that are behind the hype of Sd-Wan in general and how it helps organizations like yours. And we look at, what this hype is, what is the volume of this hype, and how it is fueled by the newer technologies. And then at the end, we'll look at what makes VMware Sd-Wan so special. So to begin with, I want to start off by saying that the trends that we see in the Sd-Wan market is that between 2018 to 2025, that's a 7-year period, that this platform or technology platform is expected to grow exponentially, right? And it is going from a niche product to a $22 billion industry worldwide in 7 years. Now, that is a kind of growth that we have seen in the past when it came to cloud computing. We have seen that within a few other major technology changes that we have seen as well in the IT world. And Sd-Wan is heading in the same direction as well. Now, when we look at this trend, it means that more and more enterprises, more and more organizations are moving towards, having an infrastructure that can have workloads not only on their prem, not only on the cloud like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or Alibaba Cloud, or Oracle as infrastructure as a service or a platform as a service. But we also see a lot of workloads for a lot of customers going from on-prem to a SaaS model, where companies don't often have control over where it is hosted or how it is delivered, which data center is the traffic flowing. So this is the part where Sd-Wan plays a huge role. And especially under the pandemic, we have seen the SaaS offerings from different organizations go up, quite large as well. The most important technology that has been utilized most during the pandemic is the UC, particularly with Microsoft Teams and Zoom as well, right? So looking at this and looking at how the applications have evolved, and that is how we want to define why we need to have the Sd-Wan, or why we see this trend driving the growth of Sd-Wan. Now, when we look at the applications itself, many years ago, there was a single system. It had everything in it. It was monolithic. It had the app. It had a database, and the users communicated directly to the application. And this is how it started. But then, of course, we moved on to a tiered system where we were able to separate the different systems under it, which is we separated the web interface, took it away from the application itself. And then we had the application which was managed by the application teams. And then, of course, the database was a separate system. And by doing this, we were able to virtualize as well as maximize the investment that we make in these systems, as well as increase flexibility for the different teams as well as for the users. Now, the tiered approach is what drives majority of application delivery even today. And on top of that, we have also seen some of the larger organizations move towards microservices, and some smaller organizations too move towards microservices architecture, where it is all a lot more distributed. And of course, with this kind of shift comes the question of where the workload actually is. And this is the part that we are looking at now, from going from a tiered to a service-oriented or microservices-oriented architecture. And it comes with its own challenges when it comes to networking. And when we look at the networking itself, it hasn't evolved quite a lot, especially on the WAN side. Now, the WAN technologies that we use today, if you look at MPLS, that is an old technology, comparatively old technology. It's been used for many years. Yes, it has evolved. There has been incremental advancements in MPLS done, and we have probably cut down the deployment costs as well as time. Yet it stays at many weeks. Today, if we want to establish an MPLS network, MPLS circuit across, say, geographical boundaries, it still remains a bit of a challenge. It takes time. It is expensive, especially in this part of the world. Dedicated line bandwidth is expensive. Whereas, the applications haven't stopped for any of these challenges. And that is exactly the reason why we have these software-defined technologies that we need to make sure that our workloads are able to service users as and when is required by the business. Now, in the past, when I started off in the networking world, this is what we used to do. We had a hub or a DC, and then we had a number of branch offices or different locations that we would have, and we would have a hub and spoke, which means that all the branches would just go back and connect to the hub, and that was okay because the majority of our workloads, if not all of it, was based in the DC or the hub. And the hub and spoke worked perfectly fine, and there was little communication between the branch offices themselves. And places like construction sites, we had alternate arrangements for connecting them back to the applications. Now, obviously, this in today's world brings a lot of challenge. For example, we have to manually provision each and every site, or at least we have to do that for a group of sites. There's a number, at the very least, there is a little bit of configuration to be done on each and every branch location. And then we have to provision that, bring that up, and then we have to test it. And again, it still doesn't solve the problem of backhauling all the traffic or bringing all the branch traffic to the DC and back to the branches. And the biggest problem, or the biggest challenge in that, was the emergence of cloud. Now, when we only have one hub, or when we only have one location where majority of the workloads were, that architecture was fine. It was more than sufficient to provide whichever users need to be serviced. However, with cloud coming into the picture, now we have two locations where the workloads are, and this obviously poses a problem because now, apart from having the hub, we also need to establish connectivity to a secondary location, which is often the cloud, which is AWS, which is Azure, and sometimes we are not able to establish a direct communication with them because they're SaaS, for example, Office 365, Workday. And those locations we don't even have access to where we can actually place a virtual device. Now, this poses a huge problem in terms of connectivity. That is where SD-WAN comes in, because with SD-WAN, there are no individual locations to be provisioned. Everything is done via a single pane of glass typically through an orchestrator. And the fundamental reason why we call this SD-WAN is because the orchestrator just controls and manages everything. There's a clear separation of control and data plane, which means that the devices or the edges that we'll place in each of these locations, each of these branch locations, they only handle user traffic. They do not have anything to be controlled on site. Everything is done by the orchestrator. And the reverse is true as well. The orchestrator itself does not handle any of the traffic. It only manages these devices and controls the traffic flow. But none of the user traffic ever reaches the orchestrator. So by doing this, what we are able to achieve is that we have taken out the reason for all of our application, all of our workloads to be concentrated in a single location. Instead, we can have a mesh between any number of locations that we need, and we can also incorporate cloud locations, regardless of whether it is infrastructure as a service, like EC2 instances on AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, or co-location data centers, or even our own data centers. So now we have clearly brought all of these locations where we can run workloads closer to all our users as well as to our customers. Another point that I want to make is that SD-WAN doesn't necessarily eliminate MPLS. However, it reduces the dependency, and also it reduces the expenditure that we need to have on MPLS. For example, instead of having a 100 Mbps MPLS line between two locations, probably we can go down to 50 or 20 Mbps, which would be much cheaper, number one. Number two, we can augment this by using ADSL or broadband technology, which will be quite cost effective compared to dedicated lines, number one. And number two, of course, through the orchestrator, it becomes extremely easy to manage, which means that when it comes to provisioning, we are not going to wait for weeks. It is going to be a few minutes, because why we wait for the hardware to be shipped to each of these locations? We already configure everything in the orchestrator, which means that as soon as the devices reach those locations, gets connected to the internet, the site is already up. So from a few weeks to a few minutes. Now, when it comes to VMware, of course, VMware is a company that is quite famous for virtualization. And a lot of work that VMware did in the initial years is predominantly on the compute and storage area. However, I also want to point out that VMware also has an extensive networking portfolio, starting with the NSX, which has revolutionized network virtualization, number one. And it has added an enormous amount of automation capabilities. And now today, specifically within that vast portfolio of networking that VMware has today, we are going to look at the SD-WAN, which was well applied to begin with and which was acquired. And now it is fully integrated into the VMware networking portfolio. So one of the primary objectives that we have today is to eliminate any risk any enterprise or organization has to migrate to cloud. Now, when I say that we want to eliminate any risk, let me explain a little further. If you look at this slide right now, so we have the data center on the extreme left, where we have a number of workloads. It may be too sensitive to host it outside, so we have it in a private cloud, and we have it virtualized, and it is serving all the users within and outside the organization. So that's one of the islands that we consider. The second one would be the infrastructure as a service, the cloud locations, and of course we have the SaaS locations, which is Salesforce, Office 365. In the past, these places were not part of our WAN, and we depended on these SaaS providers to provide us enough bandwidth and connectivity for these services. But one of the things that we can achieve with SD-WAN is that we can have gateways near these SaaS locations. We can have gateways throughout the internet in the ISP points of presence. So wherever there's an ISP a data center, and where they have their communication equipment, their customer edge routers, we have a gateway present, which is maintained by VMware, completely transparent to us. So these are already existing devices. Now, what we'll use when we deploy an SD-WAN solution is to leverage those devices that are already existing in all of these parts across the internet. And thereby, we are able to bring the whole of the internet as an overlay for our own network traffic. So in essence, what is happening here is that we are able to take the data center, we are able to take all the branches, we are able to take AWS, Azure, and GCP, Alibaba Cloud, regardless of which cloud vendor we are using. We can take all of them, and we can also take SaaS service providers. It could be Microsoft, it could be Zoom, it could be any of the SaaS providers. We can take those workloads and have an overlay built over the internet and bring it all part of our WAN, organization's WAN, thereby controlling the traffic, the application, and the user access to all of these workloads. And we can do that by using a single pane of glass of the orchestrator, which will be dedicated. That management plane is dedicated to each organization which deploys an SD-WAN solution. Now, by doing this, we are making the access easy, number one. We are eliminating complexities associated with bringing up each and every site where there is a workload. We are able to optimize and automate access to cloud resources, whether it's infrastructure as a service or software as a service. And of course, we are bringing in an enormous amount of visibility into all of the applications, how the bandwidth is used, and even at a user level, which user is able, using the most productive traffic. We can go quite granular and understand how our investment in bandwidth is being utilized today. Now, by doing this, the way it eliminates risk to any IT organization is by making sure that an option to move to the cloud is always present. It may not be today, it may not be 6 months from now, but at any given point of time, there will be no impact to users when the workloads are moved across cloud and on-prem. Now, what this really means is we had a customer sometime last year. They had 90 locations with users accessing their applications through MPLS, a combination of MPLS and IPsec VPNs. Now, when they moved to the cloud, partially moved to the cloud with AWS adoption, users started complaining that the workloads that moved to AWS were performing worse than before, obviously because they needed to have extra time for that traffic to reach the users and back to the cloud, and hence causing some issues for the users. Now, with SD-WAN in place, this will not be a problem because when the users need to access workloads in the DC, the solution is intelligent enough to send that directly to the DC. And when it needs to go to the cloud, the edge devices will be able to send that directly to the cloud instead of having to take extra hops through the DC, thereby eliminating any connectivity risk that is associated with migration to the cloud. So in terms of the architecture, it is made possible through, like I mentioned before, it is made possible through the cloud gateways that VMware maintains. Like I mentioned, these are already present across all SaaS provider data centers, across all service provider points of presence. These gateways are already there, and as soon as we bring up the SD-WAN overlay, these are automatically assigned by VMware to customers, and this will serve as gateways which are in the internet, handling encrypted traffic, thereby protecting the user information. Thereby, we are basically turning the entire internet into, or the cloud basically, into our WAN network. Now, the second part of SD-WAN obviously has to be security. Now, the reason why I mentioned this is because, like I mentioned, now that we are able to move our workloads free across cloud, across a private cloud or data center, or even co-location data centers. Now, one of the things that we are able to do with VMware SD-WAN is to bring in a lot of security focus into the WAN traffic, which is obviously extremely important, especially if we are looking at organizations that have a distributed architecture. For example, we look at retail. They have a lot of data that is very security sensitive. We look at government and manufacturing, and when we look across all of these companies, and when they do have users and workloads across a distributed geography, when we are bringing this traffic from one location to the other across the internet using an overlay. Obviously, all of this traffic is encrypted. That's obviously a given. But on top of that, we also have more controls in place to make sure that this fits into any restrictions we may have through regulations. For example, PCI DSS, we are able to apply a license, and once we, in terms of configuration, it's just a tick mark. Once that is enabled, that whole segment, that's a group of users, and all their traffic is immediately PCI DSS compliant. It is, and the compliance is, the compliance is enforced to such a detail that even the logs from those traffic are not seen by anybody outside of is not seen by anybody outside of our customer team, which is defined in the standards. Another thing that we can do is, of course, we can segment different types of users across multiple locations into a single profile, which means that their traffic can be treated as securely as possible as well. For example, finance, we can designate all the users and the systems associated with finance as a single segment, and we can have multiple segments as well, and control who is able to access that, why it goes through the same overlay. We can also have user groups and privileges as well. Again, when we look at it, you will see that in general, we have moved away from network-based or infrastructure-based policies to users and applications, which is what is required for an SD-WAN solution to function well alongside any security requirements that our customers have. Another major factor in WAN security is the ability to work with any solutions that you may already have. For example, Zscaler is quite popular with a lot of our customers, and the policies that are defined in Zscaler or in Fortinet or in Forcepoint cloud security solutions. One of the things that we can do is we can simply point the orchestrator to the IP address that the cloud services providers give us, and we can integrate that seamlessly. When I say integrate that seamlessly, what it really means is we are able to enforce the policies that are already defined in these solutions, which means that we don't have to duplicate any of the efforts that is already done, which means that we are literally taking the existing solution that you may already have and utilizing the SD-WAN as an enforcement point. Now we do have stateful firewall that we can have at the edge as well as part of the SD-WAN solution. We can also achieve additional next generation firewall capabilities on the VeloCloud box or the SD-WAN box that will install at the edge by having a virtual firewall run within them as well. We have multiple options there. We work with multiple vendors like Checkpoint, Palo Alto, Fortinet, and we can have these virtual next generation firewall images running on the VeloCloud hardware itself, thereby reducing the number of hardware that we need to deploy in each edge location. For example, if it's a small branch, we can have a single device, and it can have SD-WAN, it can have Wi-Fi access, and it can have next generation firewall all in one box. No additional devices required, and it will connect back to the overlay and it will come back to the overlay, and it can easily separate the POS traffic, user traffic, as well as application traffic, which is critical for the business. Now, the role of Redington in all this and why we are the strategic partners for you in this journey is the ability of Redington to bring multiple technologies together. For example, whether it be cloud, or whether it be security, alongside virtualization, and alongside that with SD-WAN to bring it all together. We can do that. We can do that through currently who channel partner you are working with. We can bring the same expertise through them to you and provide you a holistic service. As in, we don't have to look at these solutions as a single solution or a single box anymore. We can look at the overall pain points and bring to you a one-stop solution with multiple options for different vendors can be chosen, and we can put it together. That is I think one of the biggest advantages that we can offer. The second is that, of course, VMware SD-WAN is the best in class. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. And of course, it's the market leader as well. There's been no other vendor in the last 3 years who is even who has the same level of capabilities or has been adopted as widely as VMware SD-WAN. I keep coming back to the cloud because there's a huge benefit to having at least part of our workloads in the cloud. And of course, SD-WAN is going to go a long way in helping you adopt this benefits into your existing IT practice. And in terms of security, again, like I mentioned, we have multiple options, and regardless of whichever security path that you have already taken, we can support all that, and we can accommodate all of that into the SD-WAN without having to make any changes, either to the commitments made from other vendors or from a training and learning perspective as well. Now, I want to quickly go into a little bit of detail in terms of what VMware SD-WAN is all about and why why VMware SD-WAN, what is different from all the other vendors who may be out there having SD-WAN solutions. So the beginning of VMware SD-WAN is with the acquisition of VeloCloud in 2017. Since then, it has been growing. As you can see, some of the largest footprint companies across the world have been adopting VMware SD-WAN. As of now, we have more than 100,000 active sites with more than 3,000 customers, and of course more through our telco partners as well. And in terms of the footprints, we currently are deployed in a majority of the countries, and as well as, of course, we do have a huge ecosystem when it comes to security, and we are able to incorporate all of these advantages that these partner companies offer into the solution seamlessly as well. Now, back in the beginning of 2018, VMware had about 30% of market share. Now it has grown. VMware has more than double the share of market in the SD-WAN than its nearest competitor, which has been going back and forth between different vendors. And it is on an upward trend still, despite the fact that in some parts of the world, the market is maturing and starting to get saturated. Despite that, it's still VMware SD-WAN enjoys a huge lead. And the reason for this is a lot of customers who have enormous amount of confidence in the solution itself. And plus, it's been tried and tested across multiple mission critical networks and geographically diverse networks as well. Now, when we look at the Magic Quadrant, and there used to be a 2018 as well, that's when Gartner started looking at SD-WAN as a separate platform for the Magic Quadrant. So in 2019, as you can see, it was only Silver Peak and VMware in the Leaders Quadrant, and even then VMware was far ahead of its competition. Now, I do want to bring your notice into these two Leaders Quadrant report for one to make one point. Now, the reason why VMware enjoys this kind of success in the Magic Quadrant is because of the strength of the offering that the VMware SD-WAN has. The ecosystem that we spoke about before, that's one. The second part is that the number of cloud gateways that are available are directly proportional to the user experience that you will have, that will directly benefit the companies. Now, in that regard, currently VMware enjoys a huge advantage, and that shows when it is tested for both completeness of vision and also ability to execute. And because of this, as you can see, VMware is a consistent leader, and it has been since it started as well. If you look at the rest of the players in the market, you can see some surprising movements as well. Like, in 2019, Cisco was not even in the Leaders Quadrant, primarily because of the issues associated with integrating with Tela to the existing ISR devices. As you can see, Fortinet has just made the jump between challengers and leaders. Now, despite all of this that you see with the movement of all the other vendors, you can see that VMware has been there. It's continuing to be above and beyond all the other vendors. Again, the reason being the robust solution that VMware has, number one, number two, and also the amount of features that keeps coming out in each release from VMware is also a huge reason why you see VMware here. So even though in many cases SD-WAN is fairly new technology, but when we bring you VMware SD-WAN, it is not a new technology to the market. It is a tried and tested, and it's been benchmarked multiple times, and it is a very mature technology to adopt as well, and thereby enjoy the benefits of the best SD-WAN solution in the market. In terms of its components, it is extremely straightforward as well. It doesn't have a lot of moving parts, especially when it comes to WAN. And from the kind of world that I come from, which was pure networking, like Cisco, Juniper, when I first started, Nortel, and Alcatel, and those vendors as well. Now, one of the biggest challenges when it comes to WAN or the network edge is the number of components that usually each technology has. Now, when you compare that to this, this is very straightforward. For each location, VMware SD-WAN has a device called the edge. It can have a physical form factor, which means an appliance, and it's quite small actually. And it could have a virtual form factor in case of AWS, Azure, or co-location data center where we cannot physically place a device. We can have a virtual edge in those locations. And we have cloud gateways, which are maintained by VMware, which can be made available whenever we deploy a solution, which is available for all the SaaS locations. And that's it. And all of this is controlled by an orchestrator. That's it. These are the only components that is involved in the whole solution. And in many ways, what we do here is that when we look at the underlying connectivity, the physical layer, it could be MPLS, it could be leased lines, it could be any private connection, or it could be broadband, or it could be 3G or 4G, and as and when it happens, 5G as well. As far as the solution is concerned, none of that matters. All we see is bandwidth. So the same way VMware did commoditize CPU, compute, and storage, the same thing with WAN. we are commoditizing, or we are basically treating any type of connection as bandwidth, and we are going to determine the best way to deliver packets, traffic from one location to the other. And we are going to use only these components, 3 components that makes up the solution. And the licensing is even more simple. There's no licenses associated with the orchestrator or the cloud gateways. We just look at how many locations we have and what bandwidth is required in each location. That's it. 2 components per location. That's it. And we control that based on what is the requirement for each location. Simple and straightforward. Now, the major benefit of having SD-WAN is when it comes to transporting, traffic, real-time traffic, which could be interactive voice and video, which we use quite a lot these days. When we use Zoom or Teams or any of the other UC solutions. Now, what you see on the left is what happens when 2% of packets get lost over a WAN link. Now, if you know the internet, 2% packet loss, especially if the traffic is going over a non-private link like broadband or an IPsec connection, that is understandable. That's usually something that will happen. And what you see on the right is what we can achieve through VMware SD-WAN over the same link, right? And this is a part where VMware is very different from all the other vendors. So it is done through something called as DMPO. It is a proprietary way that VMware SD-WAN is able to make sure that traffic from one location to the other is happening in real time without packet loss. DMPO stands for Dynamic Multipath Optimization. Now, we don't have to go into the detail of what it is right now, but I will give you a brief overview. Now, one of the things that it does, DMPO does, is it will continually monitor all the links, all the internet bandwidth that's available between 2 sites. It will continuously look at how good or how reliable each of those links are, how much bandwidth is available, how much traffic can go through. And unlike our competition, we don't do failovers. If we have multiple links, multiple internet connections, we don't do failovers. We utilize all of those links. We aggregate all the links available in each edge so that we are able to maximize the bandwidth available to us. We can, of course, control this, but if we leave it to the system, it's intelligent enough to know which links to use to send which packet. And by doing this, and by also replicating some of the packets in times of congestion, VMware SD-WAN prevents packet loss to the extent that you can see the difference between the left and the right. So that is about 40 minutes I've been speaking. Let me quickly check if there are any questions. Nothing in the Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to post it in the Q&A box or in the chat box as well. We will address that. Okay, if there are no questions, I just want to conclude the presentation by saying that there are 3 key takeaways that I want to highlight at the end of this session. One is that with VMware SD-WAN, WAN becomes simple and it becomes visible. It becomes simple because we no longer have to do provisioning in each and every site. All provisioning is done from a single pane of glass with the orchestrator. And it is truly zero-touch provisioning. When we take the edge device connected to the internet, it is going to call home to the orchestrator, get the necessary configurations, and it is going to start working from that point on. The second part of that is visibility. So many times in the past, we have not been truly able to see how the bandwidth is allocated between applications, between users, and how much of that is productive without having a separate solution. Now, with VMware SD-WAN, we are able to pinpoint which application utilizes most of the bandwidth and how much of that bandwidth is expensive MPLS lines, how much of it is expensive lease lines, how much of it is broadband. How can we optimize our bandwidth spend, right? And this comes default in the box with VMware SD-WAN. We can also look at which user is utilizing most of the bandwidth, which location needs more bandwidth, which location is not utilizing the bandwidth and can have reduced bandwidth for the next year. All of these analysis can be done with the VMware SD-WAN solution. So simplicity and extreme visibility is possible, and it's included from day one on the in the VMware SD-WAN solution. The second is what I mentioned as the DMPO, as you saw earlier. We have stopped using terms like quality of service because we no longer talk about that. We talk about quality of experience. And when we say it's assured application performance, we are able to determine which applications are mission critical, critical to the business, and needs to be treated with priority. And the system is able to understand that and in real time make decisions on how to make that happen, thereby making sure that traffic that is critical to the business is not dropped, and it's able to deliver these traffic and make sure the users are able to access the applications that are important to business. And we don't suffer any issues related to such applications. And finally, of course, we are able to manage our cloud migration. We are able to determine the pace with which we want to adopt cloud, whether it be infrastructure as a service or software as a service. It doesn't really matter when it comes to VMware SD-WAN, because regardless of where the workload is, the users are always going to be connected to that traffic. Okay. There's a question from Nishad. Our company have no branches. How can we utilize SD-WAN? Let me address that by saying that even if there are no branches, there could still be a need for SD-WAN. If you plan to say adopt cloud in the future, we can still bring all of these different locations together using SD-WAN, and thereby making sure that we don't have to invest in expensive solutions. Like, for example, AWS has something called as Direct Connect, where they provide connectivity between the AWS location and the DC and the on-prem. And we can, for example, we can avoid that because that is a very expensive solution, very similar to the cost of MPLS. And similarly, it's and similarly with Microsoft Azure, I believe it's called Express Route, if I'm not mistaken. And all the cloud providers provide this. And especially if there are workloads, especially if you also use Teams or any of the SaaS solutions, there's still benefit to using SD-WAN. But having said that, I will also mention, the major benefit does come from having users in a very diverse location. Another point that I want to make, and this is very important during the pandemic, is that so VMware also has a program called Work from Home, which is a phased model for application delivery. So it combines the benefits of SD-WAN for especially the power users. There are a number of people in the organization who may not be able to visit the office every day, but they do need access to the resources which are in the DC or which are in the cloud. For such users, we can provide this work from home work from home option, where they will have their own VeloCloud edge device. And when I say an edge device, it's a very small device, so it's not huge. It's only as big as the Wi-Fi router that you may already be using. So by installing that, we are able to control the traffic that flows between this user's machine and also wherever the applications are hosted. Okay. Okay, Yusuf, we already are connected to all sites via fiber. Well, I think if it's already connected via fiber, if it is connected via dark fiber, and if the cable is already laid, then I think that the hard work or the most painful part of it, which is the cost sensitive part of it, has already been done. So in case if that connectivity has to be extended, then we can start looking at SD-WAN. But essentially what SD-WAN does is exactly what a meshed fiber connection does, but on a large geographical scale. So, and of course, if Yusuf, if you're looking at cloud adoption, then again SD-WAN comes into picture, because we can do this with two gateways. Will be very cost effective to connect the already all the locations that are connected via fiber. We can have a mesh connectivity to the cloud through that gateway as well. Okay. If there are more questions, please keep them coming. I'm just going to show my contact info here. I will definitely be reaching out to you separately with this deck, as well as my contact information. So if you have any questions, we can discuss that one-on-one as well. Okay, if there are no more questions at this time, then I will conclude the session now. And again, like I mentioned, I will reach out to you if you have any questions. Please feel free to reach out to me. I do happen to be both the technical or the pre-sales for the networking portfolio, as well as I'm also working on the sales side, which means that we can discuss both architecture as well as budgeting if need be in our conversations. Okay, in that case, thank you so much for joining this session, and I will speak to all of you very soon. And thank you so much.